Okay, welcome to our lesson internalization protocol video. Angela, say hi.
Hi.
Okay, now I'm gonna sit here. Can you check the camera to see if you can see me?
Sure.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Okay, excellent. Okay, welcome back. So the lesson internalization protocol involves us internalizing a lesson and making sure we understand why we're teaching this lesson and how we're going to teach it, and moving into some really nitty-gritty analyzing the text and stuff like that. So let's start with the big picture. Okay, we're interested in how this lesson fits into the unit, what the key takeaway is for the lesson in terms of the unit, how we tag it to assessment items. So you want to start us off with that?
Okay. So big picture is that this is 7.3 on the standards, specifically I believe 7.3C. And then the other big thing is it's 2 questions on the multiple choice quiz they have tomorrow.
Okay, tell us more about those. That probably matters, right?
Yeah. It's the first 2 actually. They have to know that the arguments against joining, so war ends, World War I ends, and Wilson proposes basically like the first UN, which is known as the League of Nations, and it fails in Congress. And we have to know basically why does it fail though. And we can already see this like tug and pull relationship between the United States trying to grapple with this idea of being a world power. And so why this matters too is because you see arguments against it pull on tropes of Monroe and Washington.
Okay.
And those are the 2 questions that are asked in the quiz.
Cool. I'm going to play with this quiz item for a second. So we have this excerpt from Lodge, and he... the first one is a contextualization question. So like, what's the context for this? And the answer is like the USA is wondering how it fits in the world. And the second one asks him to make connections to Washington's farewell address.
Yeah. Which I think the irony in all of this too, which I like hope some of the students are seeing by the end of today's lesson, is that they'll be able to say like, hasn't the United States already fully departed from the Monroe Doctrine by this point? And so that's the irony of them using these arguments to get out of it. And so
That's really fascinating.
Yeah.
That's really fascinating. Yeah. Great. And let's do a little bit more internalization of like, have students been having this conversation already? What kind of conversations have the students had about the push and pull of American intervention?
They just seen us escalating the intervention. They haven't seen it so much as it like teetering on us going, like literally it's just kind of America growing up trying to join the world power stage and be like on par with Great Britain and Germany, but instead, so we're basically just dominating the Pacific, and we saw that through 3 presidents, and then we saw us try to stay neutral in the war because we didn't see us quite wanting. I don't think it was necessarily we stayed out of World War I because we more like didn't think we could compete. It was just like on more like, why are we getting it?
Right, it's not our problem.
Yeah, it's not our problem until we made it become our problem.
Okay.
But now we're doing that reaction to that. Yeah.
I'm there. And let's do a big connection to today. Students leave this course, and what do you want them to take away from this?
For today, I thought it would be really interesting to see if they could even see too if like how Donald Trump is using this rhetoric of like American first too.
Yeah.
But I also think it's like interesting too is like seeing like how much is this actually playing into our idea of like what makes war popular and what makes war unpopular, and what is, I feel like as America's so assuming the role of the like big police, like we are the police of the world. Also the idea of like how much are we actually interested in rebuilding and keeping peace once we're redrawing these boundaries. And I think we're dealing with that with like Iraq and Syria right now. And I think, I guess the biggest thing we can just see is like with the Iraq war, of like how popular wars get and then how unpopular they get and how we just want to run away rather than actually deal with the problems.
Yeah. Later in our protocol, I think that's what's sticking with me. What makes war popular and unpopular? Yeah. So later in our protocol, let's do some internalization of the hook
Okay.
where you have some great stuff about the Iraq War and changing support for the Iraq War, and let's really think about what we want kids to say about that and how we're going to get them to say that. I think because that's going to land by the end of it. Okay, cool. So why don't you tell the camera what we want students to produce by the end of this and why this is what you chose.
So I feel like by the end of today they're going to be doing an SAQ, and I feel like I chose this one because I feel basically that it asks 3 questions of like we're grappling with 2 big texts today, and we're more like internalizing and doing a deep read of these texts, but this right here makes us put the whole thing together and really makes them summarize not only like the main ideas of the 2 texts, but also like the big picture of like what ultimately happened. And it directly ties to their quiz tomorrow.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, can I push back on you just a little bit on that?
Yeah.
So I was doing this SAQ last night. SAQ stands for short answer question, and this one has a great cartoon about objecting to American involvement in the League of Nations.
Yeah.
And part A asks for summarizing the image and how it connects. Part B asks, can you connect it to Wilson or Lodge? And part C asks, choose one additional person who would agree with the sentiments expressed in the image. I guess I didn't see, because the image is anti-League of Nations, part B forced me to go back to the Lodge passage.
Yes.
Part C, I didn't know how to answer it. But I found myself not using the Wilson materials in parts A, B, and C.
That's it. I realized, and I see. Okay, so then maybe I would change C to say choose, briefly explain the counter argument to Wilson.
To what you described in part B?
Yeah. Choose one counter argument. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, let's flush that out a little more clearly to be AP aligned. Identify and explain one
who would oppose the point of view of someone who
the person you described in part B. Identify and explain the perspective on the League of Nations that disagrees with the person you described in part B. Great. And can we quickly draft some exemplar language for that revised question?
Yeah.
And then we'll come back together and trade exemplars. Okay. I check the video. Oops. No spill, camera. Okay, we're crushing it.
Who's I think I'm making a stretch with this point. Warmer. Less peaceful. Necessary as well.
Love it. Okay, here are my exemplars.
Oh, I didn't connect it back to Lodge. Oh shoot. I messed up on my C.
Okay. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay, what are you noticing?
I don't see any vocab in yours.
In my part A, right?
Yeah.
So that was something I noticed as well. So for the people watching, part A demands briefly describe one perspective on the League of Nations depicted in the image above. Angela's exemplar includes the words irreconcilables, pro-republican, while my exemplar does not.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, I guess I don't know if in the question demands evidence.
Yeah.
So I wonder if we could, should we change the wording of the question or somehow clarify the criteria for success to demand hard evidence?
Briefly describe one perspective of the League of Nations depicted in the image above. Should we say? I mean, I think it's implied through the ACE formula. No?
Yeah.
Like, I think, like, if students were to do it on the exam, they would need...
Then let's do this. Let's, in your lesson, let's name for the students that each part requires evidence from their brain. Let's not assume, because I was putting myself in the shoes of a student, and I didn't see that the question demanded evidence. I thought the question was just kind of like describe what the cartoon is getting at. So let's somehow push the students to say you need evidence from your brain in each part of this SAQ, even though the first one is really low level.
I guess I could say describe, even if it's like, wouldn't it be, I guess, AP like wording, say describe one perspective League of Nations depicted in the image above with evidence or with vocab?
I think just, in my opinion, changing the word from briefly describe to identify and explain would get the job done. Identify and explain.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that would work.
Yeah. Are we counting self-preserve? Like, what is also in part 2? Part B, I also didn't see any vocab. I don't know if I had any.
I mean, I was correct about Lodge's perspective,
Totally.
and I felt like
I thought your E on ACE was the strongest.
yes.
I thought like in the image, American soldiers are dying in foreign wars. But I thought you said this ties to Lodge's perspective because Lodge believes self-preservation is more important than entanglements in foreign affairs. And in the source, the U.S. is protecting its own soldiers. I thought that was like really strong.
Yes, I agree. So yours, number 2, is strong in the evidence part. Senator Lodge argued that the League of Nations was not supporting Washington's address or the Monroe Doctrine.
Yeah.
You're saying mine's a little bit shallow there.
Yeah.
And mine is stronger where I tie it to the cartoon.
100%.
You did not tie it to the cartoon. You say with the help of cartoons such as this.
Yeah.
And I would tie it to the cartoon a little bit more specifically.
Yeah.
Let's norm that in every piece of this we need evidence from thing A and evidence from thing B. Right? Thing A is your brain, or let's think. In part A, thing A is your brain and thing B is the cartoon.
Yeah, okay.
In part B, thing A is Lodge's passage, and B is the cartoon.
Yeah.
And in part C, it's Wilson's passage versus Lodge's passage.
Yeah.
But in each piece, you need 2 things that you're connecting to and saying they're related to each other.
Okay, so I guess identify and explain, but they're gonna have, I guess from the lesson, which from today they would know would be using Wilson's passage.
Yeah.
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 And like Woodrow's and Hodge's
Lodge's passage.
Yeah.
Do you want to take some time to adjust your handout to reflect the stuff we've done right now, or do you think it's better to do it after?
I'll do it after.
Okay, great. So at this point in our lesson internalization protocol, we've named the big picture and why this lesson's important.
Wait, did you say this was a stretch?
No.
Oh. I kind of thought it was. I didn't know if I was reaching.
No, I think it's great. You mentioned Wilson, and we agreed that this is significant is not as strong a third sentence as this is opposed to Lodge because, right?
Sure.
Okay. So we have normed on the big picture. We have named our exemplars. We have clarified our criteria for success.
Correct.
So the next thing to do is work backwards and think about the key moments in the lesson that are going to get students to meet the bar. What do you see as kind of the key moments in the lesson that is going to get the kids to meet the bar that we want them to meet?
I think key moments are probably going to have to be when we stop after each passage. So while they're reading the passages, I'd like them to also be filling out a little chart.
Yeah.
Or, it would.
It's in the handout.
Yeah. Oh no, I took it out because the stupid spacing is weird.
Okay.
So I'm either gonna have them draw it or I'm just gonna print it as a separate thing.
Great.
I haven't decided yet.
Okay.
But it would be, so they would be like helping, and we've been doing this chart pretty recently, pretty regularly now. And so what I want them to be able to do then, though, is like we're having these charts, but I then have the series of discussion questions after to help dig deeper into our text.
Yeah, this is powerful.
Those are where those key moments are, is when we are actually interrogating the text. Because I think students may understand it when they do, but I kind of wanted to go deeper to having the correct questions to words like why is this happening, or why did they putting in the context, and then also thinking about the verbiage of what's doing that. And so I think that's going to happen in the conversations after we read the text.
What I'm hearing you say is that you want students to read these texts closely.
Yeah.
You want them to be able to contextualize the texts and relate them to things you've learned about already.
Yes.
And that's going to require a couple things. It's going to require a do now that definitely sets the kids up for success on that. Do you feel like this do now does that? Does it successfully name things that are going to get students to say, Wilson is talking in the context of the Roosevelt Corollary. Wilson is talking in the context of the sinking of the Lusitania. Let's just make sure everything is intentional.
I don't think that's so much the case there. I guess then I have this right here though. I guess there's some words in there that can lend itself, but not all of them.
Okay.
And so I think that's would be a word switch. I do wanted though. I did have the quote beneath if like by this professor at Grinnell, and she's arguing that like Wilson actually shouldn't be remembered so greatly, because I think like for a long time he's been like treasured as one of those presidents that is really great, and I kind of want them to go. I think the idea of like going into the lesson knowing that like he's somewhat now revisited as like a controversial figure, and so I think that's where
that's great.
The idea of that, but I think the vocab could switch up.
Could be more intentional.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's do more with this vocab to set the students up for contextualization of these sources.
I think then I'll just get rid of one, two.
Like I'm thinking about, like something you said earlier in this conversation was that you want students to realize that like Lodge's speech that says we need to respect the Monroe Doctrine is ridiculous and out of context.
Well, I think I was going to have that right here. I was going to switch my quick check-in, and I was going to have it be, I was going to say, because this was yesterday's lesson, but I think what it would be today then is how much has the U.S. already departed from the Monroe Doctrine?
Yeah, that sounds good.
And then have them talk about it, and then go back in, and then we'll interrogate these two sources.
That sounds good. You should use you need a verb in that box.
How did American life? Okay. Well, I'm just gonna switch this one, right?
Cool.
Okay. Well, so it would say how to what extent has the U.S. already departed by
1918.
To what extent does the U.S. already depart from the Monroe Doctrine?
Is Washington Farewell Address easier thing to do? That's on the quiz tomorrow.
Yeah, but they know that by heart, like 100% of the student knows that by now.
Okay.
We talk about it like almost every day.
Let's just internalize though, because I'm concerned that the Monroe Doctrine thing is going to be confusing for kids. Because the Monroe Doctrine says Europe stay out of our hemisphere, right?
I think the Roosevelt Correlate would be a strong verb to one to add. But I think the Monroe Doctrine, they totally know. They know what that is. I think they could use help with the Roosevelt Correlate, but they also totally know what Washington's Farewell is. Okay,
so can you say to me though, what would you want a kid to say in response to this question? How much has the U.S. departed from the Monroe Doctrine?
I would want them to say, ideally, I'd want them, a high student, I would like to say, the U.S. is already starting to, has already departed to a large extent. We saw that as their interventions were moving in the Spanish-American War, and we saw that again through moral and dollar diplomacy as we were trying to build railroads in China.
This is a departure from the Monroe Doctrine because?
Because we're now intervening in countries outside of the Western Hemisphere. Outside of the United States, moreover, outside the Western Hemisphere.
Whereas the Monroe Doctrine said,
stay out. And if you stay out of here, then we'll stay out of there.
And that's the kicker, though, I think, because as a fairly educated person, I only know the Monroe Doctrine says, you stay out of here. I don't think I realized that it says we'll stay out of there. So I think that is where I would worry that students will get caught up.
Okay. I'll switch that. Okay.
And let's just recognize that by asking that question, we are imitating the criteria for success for a short answer question.
Yeah.
And would it be of value to even say identify and explain one way in which the USA has departed from the Monroe Doctrine? And that would cue students to say this was a departure from? Because now with that, we're doing like at-bats at the exit ticket in the middle of the lesson. Setting kids up for success.
One way. Identify and explain one way the U.S. already departed from the Monroe Doctrine by 1918. Cool.
We're still running. Great. So, okay. So one key moment in this lesson is gonna be students contextualizing that. Let's talk about these passages. So the lesson requires us to read 2 passages.
Yeah.
They're thick passages. I would argue the second one is easier than the first one.
I would argue that too.
Okay.
Well, Wilson's a pretentious.
Yes, he's
academic.
damn those Ivy educated academics. Let's sit with that and think about what we want from each passage,
Okay.
and how we're going to set students up for success.
So I highlighted what I wanted. And then I also have my questions too. What I was thinking for why I did this. So, if we're saying respect in, like right here, number 1, if I'm saying according to Wilson, why is Article X an essential part? But like that sounds weird to say. And so if I would just say like, what do each nations want from, what would each nation want from the, what would each nation get from joining the League of Nations?
Mm-hmm.
And then that would, in theory, also analyze number 1 too.
Mm-hmm.
I also want them to know why certain articles are controversial. And I'd also want them to know how does Wilson address his counterclaims?
His goals, opponents would argue, and he acknowledges counterclaims. That's what you want to say?
Yeah.
Okay. So when you launch this, what do you think about getting students to read the questions before they read the passage?
My only concern with that is then I think they're reading for something instead of reading to do the like normal like hap kind of idea. And so I think that in its sense is kind of like limiting or or just like
yeah, it's more of a test taking strategy as opposed to internalization of the source.
Yeah.
What do you think of reading this twice? Once for reading it and getting a first glimpse, and then the second time reading it for the questions.
Okay.
So
double read.
Because
I just have to check my timing.
Yeah, you have to check your timing, and we might also consider chopping anything that is choppable. But let's remember that if we want this to stick with students, then close reading it twice can be a valuable move.
I think part of the reason why I want them to know the counterclaims, though, is because the counterclaims would help them also, like, if they're still not understanding Lodge's argument, then they can see it in Wilson's and vice versa.
I totally agree. It's also just good rhetorical strategies there.
I also think that's, like, kind of hard, like, harder level, too, is to know, like, how are you conceding facts and then arguing against them?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So look through your 6 questions. Do you think they're all necessary, given that you just said to me, we want them to know his goals, we want them to anticipate what opponents would argue, and we want them to consider how he acknowledges counterclaims? Do we need all 6 of those questions?
I don't think we need 4, 5, and 6. They're kind of redundant.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that's which I think might actually give us time for double read.
Cool. That sounds good. Let's anticipate timing.
So it's actually, because I wanted it done well, so it goes like, do now is 5 minutes.
Okay.
Framing our learning and trends with popularity is about like a minute and I'll round up to 2, I guess.
That's all you're going to give? So you don't want to have a long conversation about the Iraq War?
I think, no. I don't, I think for timing, I don't.
Okay.
I think for what I want to be talking about is like, I think I wanted us to be saying like, yesterday I mean, like, we've been seeing how United States, we've been seeing, like, basically examining the past couple days how the United States was able to stay out of World War I and by initially remaining neutral, and then we saw our response slowly change as the United States started to become more involved in World War I. And we were just, like, not able to follow Washington's address or the Monroe Doctrine and just got entangled up into it.
Mm-hmm.
However, today we're going to explore what happens on the other side of the conflict when we finally end the war. How will Americans respond to this idea about peace, and how are we going to respond to ideas about, like, how are we going to respond to the other side of the war is, like, where I'm thinking, is, like, where it's at.
Mm-hmm.
So that is where we're at. But I want them, I guess it would be maybe more 3 minutes, because I do want them to identify this idea of, like, is the rising popularity, is this indicative of how we will set terms of peace?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that the unit's main takeaway is about questioning America's role in the world.
Yeah.
The source on popularity of the Iraq War drives that home, that there is push and pull in America's role in the world. So I think...
It should be 4 minutes then.
Yeah, I think it's 4 minutes, and I think let's change our language, because in the example you just gave me, your language was heavy on where we've been, but lighter on the push and pull conversation.
Yeah.
Let's do, yesterday we learned about the rising American involvement in the war, the push toward intervention.
Yeah.
But everything comes with push and pull, and we've seen that recently with the Iraq War. Look at this source. What does this demonstrate to us about America's feelings toward intervention?
Okay, I'm going to try that.
Yeah.
So, we've been seeing the United States inevitably depart from the Washington Farewell's Address and get pulled into the war. We saw yesterday how we mobilized and responded. Today we're going to take a look, though, of the other side of the effect of what does it look like once the war is over? Or, wait, what is it?
Yeah, we've seen America's rising role in the world, but everything comes with back and forth.
Okay, so now we're going to look at the other side of, like, once the war is over, what's the world going to look at? And what role is the United States going to want to assume now? How does this push and pull factor play into U.S. trying to grapple with where we're at?
And one place we've seen that in today's world, in my life, is the Iraq War. Look at this source. What do you notice, and what does it show?
What does it note? Okay. What do you notice, and what does it show? What do you notice?
Right, and that's take 45 seconds.
Yeah.
And then it's a turn and talk and one share out, right? It shows us, I see that American support for the Iraq War used to be awesome, used to be strong, and then people said, this is stupid. This is not worth our time. So it shows that over time, support for war can change.
It shows that over time, support for world can change, and as support for world can change, and then I have this slide of saying, like...
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah, like, as support for the world changes, we're stuck with this push and pull, and we'll see that how is it going to be indicative of how we handle what peace looks like.
Yeah, and the same thing happened after World War I. We have a push by interventionists. We have a pull by Republicans. Do you want to say that?
Yeah, I guess I could say that. We have a push, but it's not just Republicans,
okay.
Which I do.
That's fine.
I think I'm just gonna be like, we have a push from Republicans, and we have a push from isolationists.
Great.
Or a push from isolationists, and then a push from...
A push from interventionists and a pull from isolationists.
Yeah.
Yep. And today what we're going to do is closely read two sources to fully understand the arguments by those sources, those perspectives, and everything is aligned very well to the quiz tomorrow.
Yeah. Where
you'll be quizzed on this. Tomorrow?
Tomorrow.
Great.
So it'd be like, all right, guys, why is it not loading, though? Which is kind of annoying. I think I'll probably have to... like sometimes it does this in class, and I think you've seen it where it just will like stop because I want to practice it.
Okay. We have about 5 minutes left. We've done good work for protocols. Do you want my input on anything else?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I do, because I haven't set. So we were saying identify the way U.S. has already departed from the Monroe Doctrine. A quick check-in, and then I was going to quickly explain how we got to the, because I feel like I haven't concluded that point, and so.
Yeah, that would be like. I think it's possible that we have to make a choice about do we want that question to be in the do now. Right, in the do now currently the rigorous question is responding to the Wilson source.
Mm-hmm.
And you might create more alignment in the lesson to get students to identify and explain one way that events of the 1900s departed from the Monroe Doctrine.
No. I think what I'm saying though is like right. Okay, cool. But, yeah, yes. But here's also where I'm stuck at though, is yesterday we did like home front, and the day before we did like U.S. moving from neutrality into the war.
Mm-hmm.
But we haven't done now like this war concludes, right? Like the war is over now, and I think like I need to set the context for the United States, like for the Treaty of Versailles to happen.
Sounds good.
And so this is what this slide was.
Sounds good.
That's okay? Okay. So it's just like, okay guys, so that's what this part of the agenda item is like war concludes. It's like me just quickly talking for, this would probably take like about a minute.
Yep.
And then we're setting into looking at these varying sources, compare the, but I think I'll just print that for them.
Great.
And then we go into it, and then we do one source, and then we'll do, okay, so remember our aim is to compare and contrast different views after we talk about it. Let's take a look at a different one. And Wilson versus this. And so then we're,
This sounds great. So I want to stamp one more thing.
Yeah.
In our current vision of this,
yeah,
kids are reading Wilson once for a general annotation.
correct.
What jumps out to you? What do you wonder? This is hard, but let's try to get some key ideas.
Yeah.
You can even say Wilson's a snob, right? He uses snooty language, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Then we're going to do a turn and talk. We'll share out what lines jumped out to you,
And then
we're going to read it again for key questions to make sure that everybody's
well, I
good on
think
this.
the first time I guess I'd want them to read is like what jumps out to you in what is his purpose?
Yeah, great.
Yeah, what jumps out to you and what is his purpose?
And how do you see his purpose in the document? I mean, that would be an advanced question, right?
Yeah.
Kids would say, when he uses this word, it's reflecting his interventionist purpose.
And how do you see it? Yeah.
Okay? Then the second time they read it through, they're going to be able to answer those three questions.
Yeah. I think Lodge is concerned. I think I can cut my questions short. Actually, I think these questions are kind of more interesting though, because I think when I'm asking what historical events era would cause many Americans to question,
Mm-hmm.
I would want them to like go back and recontextualize what I kind of did at the beginning
Okay.
and tie it back to. So,
Great.
but so I'm actually not gonna cut any of my questions as I did with Wilson.
That's fine. It's an easier source.
Yeah.
Say, I want you to read the source and then answer the questions.
Yeah.
And we'll check back in afterwards.
Yeah.
Okay? I think it should all be independent reads. I think it's too thick. Okay? Listen, we're going to close here.
Okay.
And let's tell the camera that Angela recently got accepted to a master's program at Columbia University for her history teaching.
Yay.
Woo!
Yay.
Okay, congratulations
Sam.
and thank you. And thank you. Okay, thanks, Angela.
Cool. No, thanks, Sam.